oil-less gas in a society which has been built the last 2 centuries on oil and gas with dense energy and carbon. It's difficult to maintain the same level if you get run out of those resources. So you are imposed to consume less. This is accepted or imposed to the society, but you gain in sovereignty. The objective would be to gain in sovereignty, to go to a moderation system. We work on sobriety, but moderation seems to be maybe more adapted. It helps to go and to reach a kind of a resilience character, as new, they represent, or this word represent the new drivers of the society: sovereignty, moderation, and resilience. And the development indicator is not anymore the GDP, but it's kind of well-being indicator, or at least it integrates the well-being in this growth indicator instead of money. And in those conditions, the taxes and regulation on circularity are changing. They are developed. They are supporting this transition, and everything is going on the right way to support this evolution and get into this circularity. And this will, of course, change the thing for many actors and for industries. There are also some decisions about taxes, regulation that will also ban the export of waste, because we consider that this is not the job of other countries to get rid of our waste, and that waste is value and resource. So we now consider that waste are feedstocks. So it's part of the CCU strategy, but we extend this well above only the CO2. So I was saying that this is changing the rules for industries, and the industries are forced to change their carbon feedstock and strategies. So this includes, of course, the CCU in this strategy, because they will not be able to be supplied as before in oil and gas. So they need to change with renewable or at least low carbon energies and recycle carbon resources. So changes of regulation are affecting drastically the industries, and probably those industries are going to produce less than before, but in a way that it is more sustainable, more profitable, but less. We have to assume this. So we produce less, we recycle more, and we do that more efficiently with more renewable energy. But we reach a level where this cannot be as easy as it looks, since we are degrowing, we are declining, so the growth is decreasing. And the consequence is that the availability also of the resource, because this is also the initial assumption, the needs and the lack of resources limits the development of renewable energies, of access to some resources needed to get this transition. And the consequence is that we have a limited development of some productions, and we have a limited development of CCU, because CCU needs a lot of decarbonized and renewable energy, a lot of CO2, a lot of minerals to produce metals, and so we are going to reach a plateau. And this is a kind of limitation of the system. So at the end, we achieve something which is more local, which is more sustainable, which is less dependent of importation, where we have developed a circular economy, but smaller. And in that, CCU has a role, but it's a limited role, but it has its own role amongst other circular strategies. Is it clear for my colleagues? Would you add something else?
Mm-hmm. And society will be happy with this. Where have we heard this before?
Society is happy in this index is high.
To finish,
Because there's no alternative, right? That's the reason, right? Yeah.
just to illustrate very quickly, this is a representation of the oil and gas consumption. So quickly, there's a drop of consumption of oil and gas. It represents almost 40% of the oil and gas consumption in Europe, which is reduced. So this is a drastic change, and it's going to be very difficult, very, very difficult. But we decide to resist and to keep going slowly. We reduce up to what we can. We don't know how much we can reduce, but this is going to help to make the system circular. About the renewable or the energy, we consider that the system is adapted to develop renewable electricity, but we are going to reach a plateau. And in this case, we are also considering that maybe nuclear energy could play a little role to compensate, but also be limited, because you need lots of resources that are not always available in the world. So this can maybe play a role and to complete the low carbon from renewable electricity. And of course, the reuse of waste is part of the strategy, and this will always increase as long as we have enough waste in Europe. And to conclude about the CCU development, we make a difference between e-fuel and e-chemicals that will be limited at one moment, and the mineralization that requires less energy than those strategies and maybe less resources, and that might keep increasing until 2050. Hope it's clear and it shows you what is the scenario of.
Thank you very much. You guys leave it on. Questions, remarks, clarifications? I have a question about the plateau in terms of time. When do you start to see that appearing, these plateaus that are reached?
It's possible between 2035, 2040.
Okay.
Where we kind of reach the limits and then maybe try to call part of the renewable of low carbon
To compensate.
electricity and to compensate. Maybe.
Questions, yes.
How's the energy mix? How does it look like?
What does look like the
Energy mix.
And do we know? It could be that it hasn't been addressed, but it's one of the things we would like to know. Of course.
electric or energy mix?
Energy mix.
Was it at all discussed? Because
You know, I don't
This
know.
is of course less of fossil. So what's left? Renewable electricity, renewable heat with biomass, use with waste, recycling, so heat, CO2, CCU can have not energy. At least CCU can bring energy or recycle energy thanks to e-fuels and e-chemicals. And a bit of
Sorry, CCU is not an energy source.
no, it's not an energy source.
You know, you know what I'd like to know? How does your, and we may not know it, but what is the primary source of energy in your system?
I think there will be some oil and gas left, still important.
Okay.
And mainly renewables competing with nuclear and biomass. Is that okay with my colleagues?
Yeah.
And somebody is taking notes about the questions and how we can address some things more in detail. One of the questions that people online have is to say, is this uniform across Europe, or do we see differences within Europe? Is it like one global vision for Europe, or do we see differences
This
regionally?
is a global vision, but of course we know that every country has a different perception, situation of its energy mix, electric mix, and maturity for CCU and so on. So this is probably a general view.
So the approach is general, but you can see variations locally.
There are variations. Yeah, the country they are already ready with a low carbon electricity mix can maybe go further and faster than others, and some others will need time. But they'll have to be ready since they still depend a lot on fossil. So maybe we can see the situation where some countries that are in worse situation to more than the others. Exactly. That would be
so that it's like it gets worse before it gets better. So this is imposed by external events. Everybody feels that.
Yes.
And then they also say, well, this is it. Our response is we want to become more independent of the external world. And that may then pan out differently for different countries. And at the same time, that is then part of the vision development at European level. At European level, we agree we want to become more independent.
The limit is the dependence of importations, and it's not easy to say that we will not depend of imported renewable electricity or renewable fuels, hydrogen or something like this.
From outside of the EU.
From outside, so there will still be a part of fossil will be imported, maybe compensated with CCS or something like this, I don't know. And also a part of renewable energy imported, because the problem is that have we got the capability with the Europe area to produce supernova, sun and wind?
And the question is, or the answer is not really. There's still going to be a dependence on external importation. Yes, Peter Willem.
Maybe two questions. So from the energy mix understood, you do not expect under the scenario the resurgence of coal in the energy mix. We won't.
Not the resurgence.
On,
coal is not coming back.
Yeah, we want less oil and gas importation, but we're not going to solve it by using more coal, if I understand correctly. And second question, if we want to import less energy sources, does it also mean because we want to be self-sufficient? Does the same also apply to industrial parts like steel, cement? We also, well, cement, we don't export that much, but steel and others, we don't import them as well. We want to be self-sufficient energy-wise, but also material-wise.
Yes. So the first question about coal, we've not discussed of it, but some reflex at the beginning would be, this is what we observe, an increase maybe of the coal consumption, but coal is not, it's a very domestic energy. So only the countries where
they have it
available, they can bet on this. So maybe some of them will bet on this, but you have a very high pressure of the society to change. So things might not be as well as they think by betting on the coal.
Right.
Second question.
So there is a basic decision to defossilize, basically. This is a stronger push to go towards.
This is the social acceptance of this transition.
Right. Is it on the same point? Because there's a second question as well that needs addressing.
Yes.
Let's do that first. So what about dependence of materials from external, right?
And the idea also is because you are able to produce, to localize, to recycle, you can maybe bet on retaining industries on your areas, in your countries, in Europe. So you expect to be able still to produce steel and cement with maybe not imported resources like the ore, or with local resources like the lime, limestone.
Yes.
Missing in the story, which is consistent. So where is the funding coming from? So you're reducing production. Yeah, some of your corporates go bust. You're no longer able to export. So it's the funding tax, and how will civil society respond to that?
Actually, all the money that you are going to not spend to fuel, to pay fuels, to pay oil and gas, this you relocate this money to your new strategies. So this is a problem. This is billions and billions of euros every year that you won't need to spend. And so the consequence is that you relocate this huge amount of energy to this transition, to invest in renewables, to invest in maintaining and new infrastructures, and developing new strategies like CCS or CCU. If you're able to do this in one.
What could be other elements to that? Because you know that maybe one mechanism, are there other ones?
Also, we discussed the fact that because you have a carbon tax on board, you're going to have more revenue on that side. We are in a society where people accept to transition to a less consuming society. So the carbon tax is also increasing. So you're going to have some revenue coming from there also.
Other thoughts on that?
Well, it's maybe related, but I'm just a bit worried about reducing imports from Russia, not so much reducing the imports from Russia, but reducing the imports. I don't see that our energy demands in the coming 3 years will go down by 40%. So we have to get it from somewhere else.
So here, before we then move on, is it like, what explains the reduction with substantial thing? Because it's part of the logic.
Yeah.
I can hear you say, I can't see it happen. That they say, we think it's gonna happen because.
Yes, we say it's going to happen because this is a choice of the society. This is a choice, or this is the choice of Russia. But this is going to happen, and the society is ready or will accept
To live with the consequences of that.
Yes, we are going in this way. So we don't, everybody doesn't want to do this, but this is the situation quite soon.
And so,
What will be the consequence?
well, that's it. So that's where I want to go then, because if we assume this, and there may be plausible reasons for it, but it's going to generate some kind of reaction and consequences. And then what would we see here? What kind of reactions would you imagine?
Well, that there is no energy to run anything, you know, so
Yes.
all kinds of production go down by 40%.
Yes.
And that's part of the story, that back to basics, we go back, you know, the quality of life is clearly gonna diminish substantially in this scenario.
Yes.
Whether we like it or
For
not.
everybody, for the rich and the poor, for everybody, things are changing drastically at the beginning. And you have to take a decision when this happens. Or you say, okay, this is the way that we start transiting, because actually we've not started the energy and the carbon transition. And this is the kick. And now we are facing the situation and we are changing now. Or you say, oh, no problem, we're going to buy it to the US, to the Arabic, we're going to buy oil and stuff. And if you do this, you're not transiting. So that we decided, the society decided to provide of this critical situation.
The fact that it happens, and we know we need to change anyway, so let's take this as an opportunity by making the problem smaller and then transit from there. Historically, have we known examples in the world where, you know, high juris was taken before the society came on another road?
Yes.
Of course, we're thinking of the early 1920s, right, in the US as a period. So it's not unknown as a, it's, you know, we may not like it, but you know, it's not unknown.
Yesterday, they forced the tap of gas to Bulgaria.
To those two countries, right?
Yes, so it happened yesterday, actually.
Uh-huh.
It's like 40% for Poland, 75% of gas to
Indeed.
Bulgaria. So
Right.
it happened yesterday.
And,
So,
it'll be- and,
I agree with the reduction of import from Russia.
right,
Where my problems start, the overall, because if you reduction of energy consumption, that's where, you know, I think it will happen is that we get it from somewhere else. And maybe we have 1 year that we have a much lower energy consumption, but it will go up again.
because,
Otherwise, all the economics will go down by 30% or something like that.
and we don't like
And that
that.
is unemployment by 30%, no money making anymore, and we cannot afford that to happen.
Well,
You know, that will create riots. There will be riots. Yeah, but low economic growth
But we accept
is -1, -2, -30%. It's not low economic growth anymore.
I talked about kind of degrowth that doesn't exist, or that it's not a growth anymore, it's a decrease.
It's a recession.
A part of the
Well, it's not a recession.
It's recession.
this is clearly challenging as an idea, right?
Depression.
Yeah, and the question, how far can you push it and what is plausible? What can we see happening, even if we don't like it? Yeah, because it's driven by external events. So the question is going to be, how far do we want to push it and what else are consequences? Because there will be other reactions to it, and so we need to counterbalance that.
When you said it happened in the 20s, so my question is, I don't know if
The Great Recession in the
Yeah, the
US.
recession, but that's not a choice. I mean, what I see,
but
what is
here-
really striking in this, and even if you say it happened yesterday, the day closed it up,
Mhm.
what is, according to me, a precedent is society deciding to give growth.
To accept that, because it is externally
As a
imposed.
choice.
But then the question is, how do we deal with it? And the question is, what are the options of reactions?
It's true that where it happened, it's in North Korea or in Russia when they become Soviet. Then there was in Europe with the crisis in 1973.
That's not a choice.
It's not a choice, but it's not a choice.
But here also, it's externally imposed. What
Maybe
the choice is you have to accept it.
Because
You say, if this is what we have to deal with,
Financial war. Yeah, we can talk about the origin of that.
Yeah.
That this is maybe
Yeah.
a geopolitical choice of Europe, or just because we don't want the war, we don't want to finance the war, or the Russia. All this is just because Russia said, okay, we are not going to make the war, but we stop, and we will sell this to China.
okay, Anastasios, yes?
Is the fact that we are in the quarter where we have high social and political support helping counterbalance the negative consequence of the fact that this recession
Has to be,
imposed?
and that would be coherent, right? That is what enables it, right?
Because yes, it is imposed, somebody's closing the ban, but we have the support, we have the, let's say, the backing, political and social, to search for alternatives.
And to have a long-term solution, so we don't have to go through this again.
Yes.
That's part of the story. Still, it will be interesting to kind of describe that phenomenon with some idea of consequences. I think, as you point out, there will be tensions. Well, what are they, and how does society deal with it? And I think it needs to be part of that story to be able to tell that plausibly. You can't just ignore it. Something will happen. The people will not like it, that's for sure. So we have to say, how come? Why are they willing to accept that? And the point is, sometimes you have to accept. If somebody drives into your car, the accident happened, whether you like it or not. You see, there are external things that you do, but I think we should have the argumentation on it, and not necessarily dismiss it. It is plausible to happen, but let's enrich the story with what it means and so on. Any other comments on this scenario? So it's called Back to Basics. Does the name correspond to what is happening there? So it's clearly a diminishment of standard of living, at least for quite a long time in the beginning, before it starts getting better as part of a transition path, right? That's it. And then the interesting thing there is that even that is capped. Right? And it's interesting to understand what are those limits, when does it start kicking in? I think that's an interesting one to develop a bit more. Yes, please.
Only to highlight that in the group, we were also considering that the society is advancing at the same level. It's not nothing that is really imposed, but the society is getting educated in sustainability and also in a more advanced way of thinking, so that everybody is really understanding the situation. So it's not that people are going to be unhappy, like, yeah, now I cannot do this, I cannot have this, or whatever.
Right.
It's all together looking for the best.
So there is, so as part of the story, I can imagine, part of it is a reframing happening as well.
Yes,
We're not just looking at one dimension of GDP, and that's the indicator of how well we're doing. There is a broader wellness-based understanding of what development means, and it's within that people can accommodate the situation.
It's not decreasing life quality, maybe it's increasing life quality.
On different dimensions, exactly.
Different.
Right. And that I think we need to describe better, and also why people want that. And then show indicators today. What do we see today that already points in that direction? People choosing to have particular lifestyles already, going for it. So I think you can substantiate it, but I think it needs to be part of the story. Because I think it's important to understand why would people accommodate it or live with it? Or what is their reaction? Yes, I come to you. Yes.
How deep do you go into scenario development? Because we're talking about deep growth. There's these companies going bust left and right. People are losing their jobs.
Right.
CO2 tax is going through the roof. So things are becoming more expensive.
And
how do you get through that with all this unemployment? So I'm wondering, how deep do you go into scenario development? Do you talk about the regulation that will be in place to help these people that have lost their jobs?
Yeah, I think, well, this is part of what we need to do next time as well. So this is, of course, the first go at it. So you went into the full complexity and started with description to start seeing a pattern of a story that could be there. Now it's about getting that to the level of granularity necessary to understand or to make it visual so people can actually relate to it. And talk about the essential things and how they change. So in our next workshop, for sure, when we do a deep dive, it's about putting more flesh on that and describing it more. And so, it's like, how much do I need to describe the misery that's going to be there for quite a while before it gets better? Well, sufficient for people to get an understanding of it. Like, oh yeah, this is really bad. And therefore I understand that people will react to it and want something else. So it's in order to understand the logic. That's how much you do. You wanted to ask something?
Yeah, it's just kind of what was already said, but I think that idea of happy people, we can also maybe consider that there will be happy people who have no other choice, just accept what's happening, and the others will like, okay, let's leave this place and go somewhere else where I can still have.
As part of the reactions that could be, right. Some people might decide this is not for me anymore, I go elsewhere. That could well be, yeah. I would be very careful with making any links to the Great Reset idea. That's quite sensitive and touchy, of course. Yeah, you had a comment as well?
Yeah, it was a little bit in the same direction. If indeed energy is not there, there are no jobs. Europe will not be an attractive region anymore.
Right.
So people might indeed leave Europe. And part of the population will leave.
Right.
Will go maybe to China, will go maybe to India because they, I don't know.
That's a real scenario question. So I think it could be part of the story, but let's see in previous periods in Europe, what is it that happens to the population? Who leaves? So that we get a realistic sense of the consequences of this happening.
Yeah, we always have people coming in.
Right.
So maybe part of that people now will leave.
Well, if they leave, it will help.
I think we can also not base on the past because we have to remember that this country, India and China, I'm going to say, they are the country that where there will be massive migrations because of climate issues. So in fact, Europe will be mostly the place to be,
right,
in terms of climate, because we are more or less vulnerable. So I think in the coming 15, 20, 30 years, we would like to stay here because we will still be able to live in the climate we live in Europe, while it will not be the case in many places in Africa and China and India. So I think the migration will still, if you look at the predictions, the migration will go more towards Europe. Even if we have less jobs, we will have just a proper environment to live in.
Yeah, I come immediately. I take as a note that we should take note at the level of the work that we need to do.
Yeah.
You asked before about the heavy trends. What are the things that we have to assume, and we need to make them explicit and discuss them as well, of course. But that's part of the logic that is being introduced there. So we have to talk about it. And then,
so I think that there's another consequence you have to build in. We're talking a lot about societal consensus on the solution. But what do you do with the trespassers? What do you do with the minority that doesn't agree to it? And that kind of carries a high risk that this becomes an eco-totalitarianism. Yes, this could easily go down into an eco-dictatorship.
So some level of radicalization of some parts. And
Yeah.
what does that mean? That's one of the consequences that you are referring to also. I guess.
No, I think it's maybe also a requirement, because if you want to have, you have very strong political support.
Right.
So that's, the dictatorship can provide that. I'm not saying that the only one, but it can.
Yeah, that's one way of getting it. Yeah.
And to get acceptance in at this level,
You need some other
you need
forces.
a leader.
You need some other forces.
You need a leader.
Yeah. So we may say something about the nature of the governance here.
Yeah,
It's maybe a bit more
Yeah.
driven, for which we see signs also already at European level as well, right? If not only in the health area, but there are some other areas as well. Okay, so that there is a harder stance taken by governance institutions, right?
Only to comment about the less jobs, not necessarily less jobs, different jobs or different way of working. Maybe new jobs that don't exist.
I think the group talked about that, and then it's a matter of transition, because the traditional jobs, you lose them, and unless you have infrastructure in place to reskill people, that's not going to happen. So it's a precondition. What is happening at that level? How come people are able to actually enter into new jobs?
And maybe it's less jobs as we have today.
Sure,
we
that's the
increase
point.
my quality life immediately, because what we do today is to work like crazy, and maybe that's not the way to go.
So that means it's behavioral changes.
Yeah, and that's the point.
And there's like an underlying, demographic or social value dynamic that describes why certain behavioral changes are happening. And to not only let it depend on totalitarian, external force, people actually want something different as well, and particularly other generations as well. And so that could be part of the story here. You, and then I come to you. Yeah.
Okay. Also in this direction. So one of the base questions we also had in our scenario: what's the base structure in region? Then is there a Europe after the start of this, or will it fall down in in the states again? So is there a common way for Europe, or is it separated into the different nations with whatever scenarios? So
what I understood from this scenario is that there's still a EU, that certain decisions are still taken at EU level, but you can have different manifestations of realities locally. So there are some differences. But from a policy point of view, in terms of goal setting and responding to the external shock, that seems to be, that's what I heard. It's still EU level kind of consultation that is happening. That's what I heard. You, and then who was the other one? You were the, there. Okay, so let's have the list first.
People online.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got just one comment from Deepak, who was here yesterday. He said energy security is a complex issue. If we shift from Russian oil and move to say North African sun and create a grid from there, you are creating another dependency and shifting it from one place to the other.
That's right. So to the extent that you still depend on external resources, you're just shifting your dependency, and we need to have the rationale. Why is that better than what we have now? Yeah, because you still decide to, at some part, to be dependent.
To be dependent on, we have another comment that is, we should not forget that most uses of fossil fuels today are very inefficient.
Right.
So if we turn to more efficient processes, such as electrification and then CCU using waste carbon, society does not need to lose out on energy consumption.
If we switch.
But it's speed, the Russian supplies will stop this year.
Right.
We will not adapt within a year.
Right. But other things will come on stream. And what's the time frame on that one? Because that could be part of the story.
At least 10 years.
Right.
15 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
At least.
So it still means you're going through quite a long time period of distress before anything gets better.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the response is not only, well, it is renewable, the time it takes for investment and whatever, right?
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, okay. So that's about the,
Yes, no.
okay. Any last comments for this
Yeah,
group
I'm
or
just-
enrichment? What would you add to the story?
What I'm here is, if the electricity, renewable electricity is restrained, what I understand it is because you're still importing fossil fuels. How then e-fuels becomes a positive business case?
This year.
Yes.
Why is this rising? Why are
Yes.
e-fuels thriving in this scenario? Even with the plateau, but why?
Why are you even starting at T0?
Right. Any comments on that or any reflection? So in the scenario, you assumed that this is what's happening to e-fuels?
Because you
Yeah, but you don't have the electricity. So
you will decide to use the electricity you have for production of chemicals if you need. If you need chemicals and there is a choice.
And then it's an arbitrage between what and what. If I'm not using it for this, I'm using it for e-fuels. Where are we taking it away, or where are we not using it? In part of the industry that is actually deindustrializing.
Yeah.
But it's a good question, huh? So we need to address that. Why is this happening? By choice, but can you do it? That's the question.
Who will do the choices? I don't know.
yeah, that's
Oh, well,
That's indeed,
and I would say those are questions that we need to kind of take note of in the scenario
Yeah.
for the group to work on and think through the logic of that, Yeah.
Is it the regulations? Because here we are in a scenario where regulations is a disaster. Isn't it the regulations that will make this choice?
Yes, could be. So here's what I say. This is where we are. These are important questions, and that needs to be clarified. And we're not going to do that today, but it sets part of the homework that needs to happen for next time, on top of the other work of going deeper and getting more granularity. So that's the first scenario. Let's move to number No, we started here, right? We go to number 1 now. So take us through that future. What is it called and what is happening there and why?
Yeah, so I will maybe take this one. So the scenario is his name makes CO2 great again.
That sets the scene.
So we are coming back. We are in a growing period without too much regulation and no real social acceptance, no support. So what we see today in a growing period, so we have a high energy price. This is what's happened today. Increasing of demand, increasing of investment in renewable, because basically this is cheap to create electricity with renewable today. We have increasing of EV for the rich people because they have it's a markup of if you are rich, you have an electrical car because it's a very expensive car. On politics, no more people trust in the politics. So you see that at the end, the state will disappear in a sort of a libertarian world. But we have some signal that China is not always that reliable supplier of goods. So we start to think about recycling only because we need to support the growth. Because if China decided to stop, we have a problem. So the companies begins to say, okay, maybe I have to relocate something, and we have some embryonic CCS, which is today. In fact, this is clearly what's happened, and we have a lot of cash, mainly at the GAFA level, but we have a lot of cash. So what will happen? So this can still grow without any problem until a moment when, with a strong winter or something like that, we will go to a blackout, as they had last year in Texas, and they had a blackout because of the summer. And then suddenly the people will understand that there is a problem and we have to move something. So we will directly decide to restart coal because you need electricity, so you will go. We will also go to shale gas directly, and so because no more regulations, so you can go for shale gas. And the companies, the big companies will say, yeah, most probably we need to invest now in nuclear because at least we will need electricity for the future to support the demand. So, which means that the advantage of that is that we will start to build an infrastructure of CO2 because still we are in a greenwashing way. So if we start coal's power plant once more, so we will put some CCS on that. That's what we give to the people, because mainly, like we see that in all corporates, even today, there are some they have to reduce a little bit their CO2. So if we go for coal, we will put some CCS. But also at the GAFA level, we will see that they will in fact take the initiative to deploy the technology. They will invest in the first kerosene because kerosene is somehow something where everybody agree that we need to make it different. So GAFA will take the lead to install, even if it costs a lot of money. They don't care because basically they have too much money.
It's like going to Mars, right?
Yeah, indeed. They are ready to buy with their own money Twitter, so there's no problem. Of course, in this immigration will start to increase because the poor people, but that's good because we have very cheap manpower, so this is good for the growth. And also for this recycling of the batteries, because basically you need some people wanting to work on that. So this recycling will still continue to grow because basically we need it, and we know that we need it because we have to be careful with some elements. So this scenario will be perfect up to the moment that in October 29, we will have, of course, the prices, because you cannot grow without a reset. And so this will be the big reset. But of course, the problem is that we've decided to start the nuclear there, so they will be in operation just during the reset. We will have a lot of renewable electricity ready, running during the big reset, and the big reset is decreasing of price of decreasing of energy demand in general. And so, meaning also that the price of electricity will dramatically drop. It will go more or less to zero because we have the investment.
Oversupply.
It's running oversupply. Advantage, our friends of the GAFA will have all the technology and the infrastructure ready for CCU in this case. I was just forgetting one point. The CCU during this first period will be only some development just for the fun here, but for to take some knowledge. But on the mineral, there is clearly a market because as there is a big demand, the CO2 will remain quite good. So on the mineral, CCU will be good. After the big reset, the price of electricity will drop. So suddenly, for a certain period, the CCU fuels will be cheaper than fossil fuel. So that will be quite interesting. And so this will,
because of the availability of cheap electricity.
Of course, yeah, of course. Of course, this is cheaper. So you have to use your assets, otherwise it's stranded assets, never good for the books, huh? Thank you. So, and then of course, somewhere in 2040, there could be another big conflict, which will once more increase the price of energy in general. And at that moment, in fact, we will see that basically we are in a situation where the CCU is more or less at the price of the fossil, and so and we have a lot of infrastructure, because also what is interesting in this world without regulation is that nobody is putting some hurdle in order to develop some technology. So when we say we go, if the market say we go, we go. So this is clear. Nobody, I'm not agree. No regulation. So we go. So we can directly deploy because we have a lot of money. We are in a economic growth.
We've been growing for quite some time.
Yeah. After some reset, we need to reinvent the economy. And so in this period, during after the big war in 2040, 2045, somewhere like this, after that, we will have, in fact, the e-fuel will really become to be the less expensive and so mainstream, and the rest will simply go down because it will be too expensive anyway, because all the cheap fuels will be over, so we will be only in a situation where this will not become very efficient. And the good news is that we have invested a lot in the CCS before, so we will be able to achieve our objective in 2050 because we will use all the infrastructure to sequestrate the CO2.
Which are resource now.
Yeah. Voilà. So this is
not only a resource, it's CCU, but also sequestration. So
at the same time.
we have everything. And recycling, in fact, is imposed by the fact that we will always need at a certain moment to be careful, because if we are dependent on some of the others, that's not good for the group.
Just a question of clarification. What explains the big drop in demand, the big reset that you have there? Why does that happen? The demand drops.
Because there are crises. You cannot grow without a reset at the moment. Because
it's just a bubble.
It's just a bubble.
Okay.
You just.
All right. All right. Comments, enrichments, challenges. Yes.
So I like the scenario very much. It's very cynic. So there's a lot of stuff within, and it's I fear that it's very realistic.
Okay.
That's one point I really fear. One of my big questions is, where are the drivers to invest in technologies you don't need, because you can run like you do in the beginning? So why do you invest in if you
Here, in fact, you invest in renewable because simply today they are cheaper than the rest. And you will see today, nobody, because to invest, I'm from the electrical sector. So today I can tell you that no electrician will invest in a gas-fired power plant or in a coal-fired power plant, not because it's not good, just because it's less sure on the investment point of view than renewable. Renewable is a capex. So you put a capex when you can consume the energy, your business model is clear and it's not that expensive. So it's better to invest today in renewable. That's clear. So this is pushed by the market today. We see in solar energy at home cheaper than the rest. So you just buy it. When there is no regulation, if there would be no regulation, everybody would put some sun energy on his deck just because it's cheaper for him today. And so that's what, because we are in a high energy price. So that's what and all these assets all this money that are spent, when you have a reset, and we saw it 5 years ago, there was a crisis, and suddenly all the price of electricity was dropping dramatically. We were at 20 euro per megawatt hour. It was more or less the end of the nuclear at that moment, by the way.
Okay, so 2-3 comments or enrichments of what would you do to improve this story?
To complete what Daniela was saying to your answer, to answer your question, our assumption is that indeed we're in a Trump wants to Portuguese, no more regulation and so on, but the awareness on climate and on the need to transition is still there. So corporates continue to invest. It's good for us, it's good economics. And the need to transition is so without the fact that management companies will come back in 5-year times on everything they've been investing in terms of transition. So it's not only energy, but it's the recycling and we didn't question that. We didn't think that people were going the other way around.
Okay, other comments, please.
Yeah, I have just one comment. When you talk about recycling, recycling will be at full speed. But do you really think when there is no legislation that recycling will become at full speed? If you look at recycling of batteries, why is it not happening? It's because there is a law that you need 25% recycled content. If it wasn't there, I'm not sure whether
it would happen.
I'm not sure on that. The batteries, a big part of the recycling in the batteries is coming because we are lacking cobalt, we are lacking copper, we are lacking, so we cannot find it more because it's becoming to be more expensive. And so at a certain moment, you would need to make the recycling because simply we are coming to the limit of the system. So that's true. For the lithium, this is not true because for lithium, it's still better to just put it away. But for all the rest, it's better to recycle. And for this, there is no problem. There are enough of company making the recycling.
So, but that's a logic that should be explicited in here to say that there is that scarcity logic that is maybe anticipated even because people do have a long-term view, and that for that reason, that's what they do. That's the risk management.
We see that even in the United States now they observe everything was in the hand of the Chinese. Now they see the Chinese, in fact, they can simply stop.
So we're dependent too much.
So we are too dependent. So we need to do something. If you need to do something, then
so the logic of autonomy comes back in different places. 1 or 2 more comments, Celia, and then Peter will.
It's more of a question. So in this scenario, would it not make sense that CCS, it's not a permanent storage, but that it's an intermediate storage, and CCU and CO2 becomes
can be
well. So that's because if you need to ship CO2, and this will be a way to
In fact, the big advantage of what he said in this scenario is that first we don't care about CCU. We just care about the image, and so we install an infrastructure in order to decrease the cost of the CO2 sequestration. But by doing that, we also put the perfect pipeline. So that's why we make CO2 great again, because we will be in an abundance of CO2. So we have, when we have the big reset, so when we have the prices decreasing the price of electricity, we don't have to build an infrastructure to capture the CO2. It's there. And so when you have green, when you have electricity cheap and you have lots of CO2 and you have people having already started the deployment of e-fuels for whatever reason, all the ecosystem is there just to do it.
Interesting logic. It's like an unintended consequence of a driving logic, and then infrastructure is built almost as a side effect, but it's there. It creates an opportunity by the time you have the bubble bursting.
Yeah, because we always are in a growth. Because when we arrived there, we said then we will go back to another scenario, but we were optimistic. We will keep it growing.
It's on the opportunity side. Any other comment, enrichment? Yeah, question?
Yeah, I have one warning, one question, one comment. Just to make it clear, warning, when we come to the point of modeling and quantification, the model we have, one of the shortcomings is that it's linear, or you can start when something starts and ends, but you cannot say it goes up, then it goes down, it goes up again, then it goes down. So it's something just that you're all aware of this. I'm not saying that you should prevent it now from making assumptions.
Right.
But just be aware of this, that this is a shortcoming that we have to live with. That's the, and I see already a question.
Yeah, so is it possible then that you do the model for that period and for that?
For instance, that would be a way around it. Yeah. Potentially.
That's quite complicated. What we can do is say the historic trend that we see now continues until 2029. And then we see the trend reverting, and the trend reverts between 2029 and 2040, and then it's stable afterwards.
Right.
So there is some variation that we can do, but really like here, up, down, then up again, then more down again, then up again. That's not something that we can do, just that was a warning.
Right.
Then second, the question, we say because of the crash, the resets, electricity will become very cheap. Am I understanding to correct? This will also lead to high degree of electrification.
Of course.
Building, heating, industrial sector. So
clear. When electricity is clear, it's provided to everybody. That's clear.
Right. And then based on that, my comments, but it's something to be seen when the top right. I'm wondering to what extent this will be very different from the top right, where we also have abundance, cheap, zero carbon or low carbon.
So for now already, how do you see this scenario? In what way is it different from the one on the right? And then we'll come back to the question again later on. So what would you say differentiates this one from the story on the top right?
We have no regulation, so we can go fast. Okay. And in fact we have in this
we have no regulation, so we don't go at all.
In this case, we have somehow some investment in infrastructure that we can use quite quickly. So in fact, we can react opportunistically quite quickly.
Cowboy operators. That's why they CO2 great again, right? Now I see 4 fingers. Yes.
So only to answer to that question, we had the example also in the discussion. Think about shale gas. In an environment like North America, how quickly they could deploy a new technology. And how quickly they could completely change the world.
And because of the autonomy requirement again, that was priority, and that made it happen quickly. That's a good one. Other fingers I saw.
It was related why regulations would be against something positive.
Because
for example,
regulation will push you in one direction.
So you are going to pollute a lot more or something during a short time, so that regulations would prevent that.
It's just that the regulation is apparently not the big driver here. So it's not that it is against, or but it is just not the driver in the scenario.
It's only economical. We have no more states. It's just a big libertarian
Okay.
Europe.
So what I would say in terms of compensating that, we still need to talk about the role of the government in this scenario. Yeah,
No more.
but I don't, no more, I understand. The thing being, the main driver clearly is one of market forces.
Yeah.
And let's then still talk about, and you know, you can't think away government just like that. So you have to think about the role and why are they taking a different role. I go to the lady first, then I come to you. Yes.
So about the absence of a government.
Right.
There is such a tradition in the EU of regulation. I have a doubt that industry, faced with suddenly no regulation, would trust the environment to go and invest heavily in polluting assets, while they, I guess, will keep in the back of their mind that there's going to be the reverse of the card and that they will be impacted by new regulation later and then have stranded assets. So I'm questioning whether the industry will really go and invest.
Yeah. So what's the long-term rationale for the investment that we do see happen here? That's the
Exactly.
thing.
But when we follow your logic, then we fall into another quadrant. Yes, so our task was to stay.
Sure, as long as you can, indeed.
Yeah.
But then, the point is, and then we need to strengthen that rationale.
Yes.
What keeps you there?
Yeah, so we had scenarios where like the youth were rebelling, but
Sure.
that brought us from 1 to 4.
I fully understood. And so the question is, how far can we take this logic? And we need that rationale.
Because this rationality is because of a regulation, so that
Of course.
was not in our case. So.
Yeah, right.
And you took the liberty to go to the extreme, but that's okay, it makes a point, and now let's make it plausible in the sense of taking into account other factors that we know are there too. Yeah.
Just wanted to say the existing regulation are there, so they're not disappearing.
So what is happening to the existing regulation? That's what you're
That's
saying.
why
What role does it play?
That's, for instance, for the push of the mineral CO2, this is thanks to the ATS regulation, that's clear. That's
So you're surfing on the current regulation. You're using it where it's useful, and you're not bothered by what it is
And
not.
when we will have a blackout, I can tell you that all the regulation regarding the electricity will just,
Priorities will change.
priority will change. Because the people will see the best movie and then suddenly, or Kardashian. And then suddenly no more Kardashian, so there will be a
Revolt.
revolt.
So,
And then, just to answer this question, one thing that you said a bit quickly, Daniel, is the fact that there's a nationalism and question marks on the future of the EU. So when the regulations go, I mean, at some point there might be no more taxonomy, no more nothing. And that's why when you were asking what is the difference with the rights, I mean, yeah, no more EU, no more regulation, and going back to coal is not something that we cannot imagine today.
exactly.
But it's an extreme scenario.
Right.
Yeah, we had also in our scenario that education will disappear.
We have that as well. Yeah, for other reasons.
I agree with
And I don't tell you how many people must die here to feed, okay, last time we did 100 million, so I think in 100 years after we can target 4 million.
Did you want to say something? Okay, let's move to the next one, and I'm aware of time, so I'm going to ask the next group to try and be as succinct as you can. So let's move to the bottom left scenario. Bottom left. And you are taking this one.
Okay. So let's start with voting, because we got 3 names. Eternal firefighting, Red Hot, and Firewall Europe.
So let's listen to the story first, and then we can come back to that.
Okay, yeah, that's your exercise. Why do we think it's red hot? Because we go the temperature increase by 2050 to 2 degrees Celsius. That's the result of what our scenario is coming. So we see a lot of climate migration worldwide, also towards Europe. And also in Europe, we don't know where Europe was. I think that's part of what was already discussed in a way, like either Europe breaks up or European community, or how you would like to define it, is expanded. And not only to the east, which may be conflicting right now, but also to the south. So that North Africa is not a future distant area, but actually very close at heart. But anyway, what happens now? We see inflation. we see geopolitical conflicts and things like, and so security of supply is eminent. I think we don't discuss that. We all agree that, and we saw that before. But what we also see is the deployment of renewable electricity is happening and continues. What we also in our scenario see that as a driver is not the climate, but it's costs. So we see that some developments are basically cost reduced, and we saw that before as well. So we put in more wind energy, more solar energy, just because it's low investment cost relatively compared to nuclear, and we don't have money to do an investment over 10 years to finally make some electricity at the end. So, but what's also happening here is that the government is unreliable. But that is news, because that has been for decades. But also populism plays here a role, and unstable governments can play a role here as well, or at least unstable enough to prevent big investments. On the other hand, we don't have the money for that either. So we go on, like short-term objectives. That's where we're living for. We forget the long term. What we're saying more, guys. Secure supplies, essential supplies at lowest cost. That's what we say, so the electricity, lower competitivity, Europe's competitiveness is reduced because of all the efforts, and that leads to protectionism. So there is some options here that we, and the unstable landscape of the politics, and further on the longer distance, we see also because the supplies become so hard to get, that for that reason, and we saw it before also, that circularity becomes more pointed. That's not only recycling end of life, it's also extending lifetime and multiple uses and secondary uses of pieces. And we thought, like that has to happen in Europe, because China is not going to provide us with pieces of equipment that have a long lifetime. It's much better for them to have shorter lifetimes because they sell more. So we become self-sufficient economy, and the population, demography. We have not touched it really, and maybe it's outside the real scope. But you see an aging population that requires more care, and so more money will go to care and less to education, because the number of kids is reducing. So basically, why was it then the internal firefighter? Because the governments have only short-term objectives. They do things that helps now, and they go from step to step. And I see that somebody wants to help me out.
I just mean that maybe we have to explain why they get to short-term, because we have more and more crises. What we are seeing now is the worst, with the more pandemics.
Yeah, but also because populism, populism, where it's also
the taste of the day,
the flavor of the month. Yeah. And because there's no money, so you overcome the first problem, like we now, like reduce Russian gas. So we don't go for this scenario. We just buy our fossil fuel somewhere else in the beginning. Okay, red hot, because 2 degrees Celsius, and firewall is because we see that we are becoming more detached from the rest of the world.
So I guess in this world, any kind of targets for CO2 emissions?
No, and e-fuels are not there. CO2 emissions start to rise and then go down a bit because of reduced activity, but also increased renewable electricity. And that's basically because it's lower cost, not because of the benefits from the.
Also, we want to become more and more self-sufficient. So
it's also a driver here.
Yes, self-sufficient. Yeah.
Indeed. Yes, please.
On that, then we thought that there can be different scenarios how it will continue after 2050, and one sort of kind of they need to start some kind of action for
so that's a big question mark. This scenario ends with big question marks. Where is this going, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think this is the scenario we used to term dark, right?
Right.
Morning.
Uh-huh.
And so what I'm missing is a little bit the light side of the dark scenario. So this is a scenario where I see a lot of creativity in people because people are struggling to survive.
Right.
You will see a lot of development of private entrepreneurship. Yes,
Because they not find solutions for the
Yeah,
problems.
so it's not the big wind park, but it's the little hut with a little wheel on top of it. Yeah,
So-
you'll see a lot of that.
So we could enrich this scenario, if that's the overall dynamic, to start saying, also here, we see consequences of it. And if the need is high, people get creative, solutions are found, locally very diverse.
Yeah, very
So
small
can we enrich this and then see what that means? I don't know yet in terms of CO2 use or whatever, but at least something that says there's more happening here than just going down the drain, right? Yeah, okay.
But we wrote that in fact in the, so we will be very creative in terms of low cost things. So we try, because we have relatively,
Right.
very little money, low resources,
Indeed.
not that much energy. So we will invest our energy and our creativity in low cost solutions, also maybe low cost CCU solutions, but we didn't get to which type of solutions.
No, but the point is that for that, for
Niches, I think is also, and that's in a way what you're saying as well.
And so you could see things more at local scale, more circularity before autonomy that people want to build, and then you could question what could be the role of CCU there,
Yeah.
right? Potentially, that's to be developed.
I think that what we get from the first presentations is that you really need to be on the top of the chart to deploy CCS and CCU because you need huge investments, private and public. So here in this kind of scenario, like the first presentation, you don't really have the means for it. You see it's a good solution,
But the political stability is also missing here. And I
Yeah,
think
of
that
course.
is.
So we understand the conditions that are necessary for it to be able to happen.
You're going to
That's
have CCU and CCS, I guess, when we didn't see, we didn't hear for the presentation number 2 yet, but for hours we were there.
right.
It's not an ideal situation, but we're there. So the two scenarios below, the way you have the means.
So, and this is advancing, and we will spend more time on that in the next workshop, but let's use the scenarios to really understand what are necessary conditions. You know, and that's part of it. Let's see what the potential is, but what are necessary conditions in order to be able to achieve that? So we can use the scenarios for that. Okay, any other enrichment or something? So I think it can be increased in stories about what else is happening as a reaction to the dire situations.
Maybe to compare this scenario with our scenario, the first one, because for the CCU, I think that the difference is that in our scenario is less needed. And it can like auto-feed itself because it's less needed, but there is also added value from education or whatever that we said. So it is useful, but less needed, but auto-feeded. And here I think that is not economically feasible and is needed. That's maybe the difference. It's more needed, but less possible to have it.
Yeah, there's not enough.
There is no money, you cannot have it, but in the other,
Right.
it's less needed. because you-
And so the tension between what we want and what is possible, what can be done.
We don't have free electricity. No.
All right, thank you very much for that. You, Peter Willem, on
Yeah,
this one?
Very short question.
Yeah.
Just for the follow-up. Am I correct to assume this also means lower consumption levels because you have more poverty? It means maybe also increased coal use, but unabated coal use, or because you want to get rid of?
Maybe.
That's, you know,
Temporarily.
we were thinking that will be big oil based on what's available, not on demand.
Because, because that's the lowest cost. We have it, well, let's use it.
I'll do my best to see how this can translate into.
That's,
Further discussions to see. how
All right,
it goes.
let's have the fourth scenario,
I know.
which is scenario number 2 on the top right.
Yeah.
Is that what we're listening to now?
Yeah.
So let's hear it.
No, it's.
So who is going to present this one? Right, okay. Thank you very much. So, all right.
What was the name of your scenario?
Yeah, that's still, you know, that was, I was wondering, you know, we still have red hot, eternal firefighter, or the fire.
Yeah, and so red hot is about an end state. The firefighting is like the dynamic that is happening.
Yeah,
And the last one.
it's just the firewall Europe, it's just like that Europe
Oh,
is in
as
more or
a
less.
reaction.
not outwards looking, but inwards looking.
Yeah, so let's keep those options and then we'll talk about it next time. Let's listen to the fourth scenario.
Okay, so we call it the Phoenix. And it starts with three statements or three observations from the pandemic crisis, from the Ukraine war crisis and energy crisis into it, and from the climate change, natural disasters arising more and more that we see. And each of these are driving some reactions on the pandemic situation. We see that globalization is not always a solution, and there's a strong push for reindustrialization in the EU. We believe that there are already some trends showing that in the medical sector, for example, and this reindustrialization is driving for full employment. And we see that level of employment in Europe is already increasing quite a lot. And that reindustrialization with full employment is also driving financial resources largely available. If we now look at the situation and the crisis that arises from the war in Ukraine, we see that we have a push for a unified Europe, which is also going for a driver to independency from gas imports. It's a driver. We're not there from day one to day two. It goes towards that. And if we now go through the climate change natural disasters we are observing in our countries and elsewhere, we see that the public awareness is strongly increasing, which is also pushing for the adoptions of progressive governments. Oh, we've got a nice picture. So now this is the basis. And from there, we see that the progressive governments are strong enough to go for 360 degrees operation in terms of regulatory efforts. We've got the standardization, we've got the targets, we've got everything that covers the renewables, the new technologies, and so forth. And that will, for example, bring us with a very strong renewable energy directive, with a very strong emission trading system, with standardization, each of them addressing either the e-fuel emergence or the deployment of e-fuel or mineralization. Back to the energy situation. So we are going to an independency from gas, not from day one, of course, but it also will drive massive investments in renewable. Let's remember that we have the available resources because we have reindustrialization with full employment. From the massive investments of renewable, we will also be able to have large deployment of green hydrogen, which will of course allow us to invest in the e-fuels. So we will have the kickoff of the e-fuels just a little later than the massive investments in renewables, but something around the horizon 2030, 2035, and then also with the chemicals, the CO2-based chemicals. I would go then back again to the industrialization. The available finances will also help in the investments, very strong investment in new technologies, already as soon as 2030, and it will also, of course, have an impact on the investments in the infrastructure which are needed for the e-fuels. And this is not a closed EU scenario. We know that even if we have massive renewable investments, we won't have enough in the EU. So thanks to the regulatory track, we will also develop the technology on direct air capture, and the combination of direct air capture and renewables from countries where you've got a very nice scope for renewables, whichever in Africa, in South America, in deserts, we will be able then to have some large developments of e-fuels, which will be imported back to Europe so that Europe can sustain its economic growth. Voilà.
Thank you very much. So this looks like the only scenario where they are able to spend the gap to make it to direct air capture so that you can be on a new lease of life again.
I'm looking to my group.
Yes,
Yeah.
there's the bit about, because we've got the progressive government, we've got universal basic income. Yes. Which is driving the acceptance of low carbon materials and recycling because people can afford to do it.
Right. Makes it viable for population also.
It also increase the willingness to pay to have some business models for the chemicals we have.
And we've got
That's right.
lots of education going on so that everybody knows.
You don't have an aging
Resealing
population.
necessary.
It's a lovely world, yeah.
So also a strong EU, we understand here in comparison with some of the other ones, it's a strong driver actually. And they happen to have the solution is necessary, there's some good thinking happened there. That people say, yes, we support this because this is the direction we want to go.
We were a little silent on required minerals.
Yeah, well, we did discuss it, didn't we? And but we talked about a lot more recycling. So, and actually, we discussed at length about the prospect of opening mines in Europe.
All right,
And what's the impact of that? Is that feasible?
right.
Or
So
will
we need to have some
sell it?
information on critical materials and stuff like that to be able to make some wise choices. Any comments on the logic? What would you add? What is not coherent, or how would you make it more coherent?
Yeah, it is very much technology, technology driven. So we assume that the technology is there to solve all the problems.
Mhm.
Is there any kind of behavioral change in the society?
Yes.
Because can you grow up forever? Where is the limit? Is there a plateau in the economic growth?
So we, with the public awareness and the progressive government, we also saw that there was a market for low carbon products, and coupled with less consumerism and increased circularity.
So the behavioral changes at consumerism level, clearly less consumerism. People are more aware, think about the effects of what their buying behavior, I take it. And the last point you mentioned was that,
Increased circularity.
right, and circularity, yeah.
But I don't think we've put a plateau. I think we should.
But that's a consideration to see where is this dynamic going, is the sky is the limit, or
Yeah, the population is also growing.
what are the balancing mechanisms in
Yeah.
place here?
We have a wealthier population, so that tends to moderate
population
the
plateaus,
population.
So maybe also to answer this question on technology, we don't think that the technology is already there, but we have a huge investment in technology. And also from what we see is that we can foster some breakthroughs to have, for example, new photocatalytic systems, other kind of catalysts, going for iron catalysts or whatever, so that we can avoid some shortages in resources.
That's funny, it's only this scenario that showed black.
Yeah,
That's funny.
funny, logical also or not, or
Yeah,
are you surprised by
logical.
it? Logical.
No, we were, in our group, we were asking what about the DAC, and at the end, nobody cared.
Okay.
Because it's too expensive.
Yeah, but there's no business case if there's no regulation on it.
Yeah.
That's it. And that says it all. Just for clarity, is there a scenario where there's no Europe anymore? Let's just take the European dimension. Where don't we need Europe in the story, or where is Europe even declining? On the top left.
On the top left,
You don't need Europe, and so we can easily make that a scenario where there's no Europe anymore, or its relevance decreases somehow. That's it.
Well, we have there is this split in a way. You either have decomposing Europe, because of all the populism, and so that is a risk, I think, or it grows. But I don't see it.
Yes,
It's
it's great.
important in the whole consideration.
And that it would still be there in your scenario.
Yeah, there is
Okay.
something. Yeah.
I want to do two things and then we're going to finalize because it's time. But what are considerations for the set of a whole? If you look at the four scenarios, and I asked the question at this stage, and I know it's very embryonic, it's beginning, but do you feel like, yes, I can see it going that direction? When you worked on developing the story, could you see it going that way? Or who was working on a scenario story and said, I'm thinking here, but I really don't believe it? Or was it like, I could see it, I sometimes make a joke and I take it to the extreme, so it's fine to make fun, that's okay. But who really thinks my story, I really don't believe it. It's just impossible. Or do you think, no, there's a logic here. We've got something, I could see it happen. We need to fine tune, we need to balance, but it's plausible. Yes, please.
I would argue that the scenario of back to basics, I think,
Yes.
may be plausible. So
Maybe plausible.
Low economic growth and strong.
So the bottom left, even there, you say,
Yeah.
even that
No,
one.
not the bottom right.
Ah, bottom right, yeah. Okay. Yes, I'll comment and then I continue.
So for our Phoenix, I said in the beginning, I'm a more pessimistic guy in this. So I really like it and I think it's plausible, but I think it will not happen. So
And what's the main reason? Why?
Because I think I need to fill in some of the aspects from the make CO2 great again. So because this is very driven by the industry, and I think that's reality. So that's more reality than ours that is very driven by societal changes and government. So I think that will be not really the case, but it's
okay. So it means that part of the challenge here is to underpin that with more plausible and strong logic and dynamic to make it plausible. Our task is to make it plausible. It's not to say we reject this or that. The uncertainties are there. They're fundamental. Let's make the scenarios as plausible as we can. That's it. But it needs more work in order to be convincing enough for you. And then I saw, yeah.
I think that we are today in Europe more in the right side because of the context of Europe. 2 and 4, I think that 2 is a very optimistic, trusting technology a lot, and 4 is not trusting technology, so we have to do something else because the population is growing. We have limited. We have only 1 planet, not 25, and that's it. So we will be in between the 2 and 4 somewhere in Europe.
Right. Yes.
No, I wanted to just make the comment that for me the 4 have their, uncertainties, of course, but
sure.
They force seem to be plausible.
Yeah.
I mean,
so that means with additional work, which we
amazing,
need to do,
yeah.
we can make it into more balanced stories and with plausibility.
Even the last one, which seems very optimistic, but I mean there are certain elements explained in the beginning that are true.
Okay, and they're also different enough to think through. It has different consequences for CCU and even at different levels. That's okay. The question is, you talked yesterday about the voices that we don't hear, the people that are not here. We are not representative of other people that we should hear the perspective of. Which perspectives are needed? Who do you think of? What perspectives are we not hearing here? Or
Association of syndicates,
the syndicats, the syndicates, yeah. So the vakbonden, the man in the street. So Joe Everett, right? So
the people you called heretics.
The heretics are really people who have a very different view on it. To really critically look.
Ecologists.
Ecologists, yeah. Okay.
People were voting green.
Right. And so really the NGO movements in a way, kind of, yeah?
Yeah, the extremists.
Right.
The activists, but also just consumers.
Right. So what I think, and I'd like to hear some other ideas. What you probably may expect is, because we will look at seeing how can we integrate those perspectives, either because there's a document available or people available. We will probably ask you for your suggestions. Who are you thinking of? Who could we contact, or what kind of information should we include so we can get those perspectives in here as good as possible?
I think that the X-axis, the government and society, that's what is missing more here.
To understand more of that dynamic.
Yeah, the dynamic. Someone from Europe to regulate things.
Right.
I was thinking of someone from EU.
From EU as well. So from the institutional side and governance, that kind of voice and perspective. Okay. Right.
Maybe we can, I don't know what's the intention of certified, but maybe do some kind of casting and organize a session where you have a presentation and say the 4 scenarios.
Yeah, like a sounding board.
So the idea would be that if we have a more or less distilled overview of who are we missing, that we invite them in the second.
So that could be a possibility. We're now here and we're considering if we have a sense of who and who might be the people that we would involve them here in developing scenarios further.
Put the blue a little bit more on the green.
But do you see a chance to get the man on the street into these workshops? So I don't see this.
No,
NGOs may be possible.
But it can be a consumer organization. So this is what we have to
look how do we bring it in, because you could do, maybe it's people we identify that could participate, or maybe we say for a particular group, maybe there's a focus group that can happen somewhere on some issues, like we present the scenarios and see how they react and add to it. We have to find ways of what is feasible also in the timeline, and if we understand who to contact, who are the people, and so on. Right.
Well, I think everyone can do that exercise at home, right?
Well, it could be, so I think we need to reflect on that and then see what is it that is needed, and then see what can you do to make that happen, or what can you bring to the pot, so we can integrate it in the process, yeah? And then we can also see what can be organized as well. So in terms of overall place, we are now here at the end of this workshop. I know we're all knackered, it's been intensive. Do you feel the muscles that have been strained? Like here, les ménages, no? Yeah, so well, that's what's being stretched here. That's the worldview. So the idea is that, of course, we'll give a feedback to the General Assembly. We are preparing the second workshop. What is this one about? A deep dive. We have now embryo scenarios, you know, with some rough edges. We have some comments as to how we need to enrich it, strengthen it, and so on. So that's what we will do the next one, but also a whole series of questions to actually give flesh on the scenario. That's what we'll be doing. So by the end of the next workshop, we should have more fully fledged scenarios, well balanced, and that contain, you know, kiki, yeah, in Japanese, opportunity and threat material in there.
Just a comment. So in the next scenario, we will have Peter Willem that will this workshop will haunt him probably, but the second workshop he will do his best to translate what he heard from the 4 scenarios now into what would be required by the model. Okay, exactly. So how to put all that stuff into the model. And a request from us is that people that were here today, as much as possible, be also there in June.
Of course.
Because if it's a completely different composition, then it won't make sense, the exercise. So of course, we will send logistical information and save the date and all that stuff, but keep the dates 16 and 17 in your calendar, right? So that you're here.
Already, so
perfect. So do what?
Fantastic. We need role models, right?
Yeah, fresh and everything. Sorry? No.
Do we need to say anything more on the overall thing at the stage?
Yes, and the fact that save the dates have not been sent for everything. No. Only for the first 2. And we will try to put this a little bit further down, so maybe the first days of July, because that would leave enough time to gather the information that we have from here. Okay, so let me try it again. We'll try to put this one, which is a feedback session from the second scenario workshop, from the deep dive scenario. We'll try to put it here so that we can have enough time between the 17th of June and 30th of June to get feedback and to collect the feedback. So we'll try to put this here. So early July. And action on our side will be to send you save the dates for this one later on. So first week of July maybe, and this one, so that you have this in your calendar at least. Yes, please. Yes.
We will be supplied with some notes from different scenarios, because of course the scenario we worked on, it's very clear in the head.
Yes, yes.
Others, it's, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So an exercise on ourselves is we will have to prepare something to present in any case in the General Assembly on the 4th of May. And we will do that in the week. We will send something out in the week of the 10th of May, so that they have enough time to get the material to digest it. And we will take all this feedback and we will use it also here. So we will send out material of what happened today.
Yes. And I guess what we can do is, from all the outputs that have been generated, at least take pictures and make minutes of the meeting. So that's raw material, but you have it. And then on top of what we will be having a digested way for the feedback, like that. One thing that will come to you as well, because I don't think we have time to go over it now, is to understand, like was mentioned, what reports should we be taking into account? If there are some reports on modeling that has been having quantitative analysis, you know, maybe you have ideas. The idea is not to have 100, but if there's like 7, which ones would you say? You know, what is it that we need to take into account that we can build on? Now that you know a little bit what is relevant, you know, to feed which story, where can we find bits of logic, where can we find data to support, and so
not only build on, but maybe also benchmark, because you might have different information in the scenarios of IEA, for example.
Right. So we'll send an email with that to ask for your input on that. Is that okay? How do you feel now? One word?
Relieved that can go.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Right. But otherwise, how would you express it? Satisfied. Okay.
Intensive workshop.
Yeah. For
Brain dead.
Yes. Yeah, indeed. So what I can promise is the next workshop will be from the same quality. So it will be intense, but it will be satisfying at the same time. And the thing is, the more you give it flesh, the more clear it becomes. And then you have your set of glasses on which you say, oh my God, I'm seeing better now, right? And that's going to be the case. But it's still going to be intensive. That's for sure. So I would say sleep well before the next workshop. And we really need you, yes.
Yeah, that's what I realize now is that the translation towards what is the role of CCU in a sustainable energy system.
That needs to happen still.
That is, you know, and under what conditions does it work and not work? That's still quite fake.
Well, and normally, and that's part of what the deep dive is about. Put more flesh on the bone and then think the implication questions. What does it mean for, of course?
On the other hand, I think it's the exercise we've done is very interesting for CCU, but it's interesting for a much broader.
Broader as well.
I mean, I would like to, be working in the back. I would like my risk people to look at this.
But the expectation is that the next workshop we will put, let's say, CCU more in the center of all.
We need to say more about it. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So because that's the focus. But the point is we're working outside in. With this, we get the sense of context. We still need to go and do a little bit of work, but then we zoom in more and more on CCU, its role, what is happening there, and what does it mean? And that's where the modeling will help in terms of results. You know, what it means in terms of CO2 emissions and what have you, energy use and so on. All right. Good. Then I think we can.
Yeah. Thank you very much for being here today. To all the team and Alain and Peter Willem and Dimitri and the place here that hosted us, Melanie and the 2D remote as well. And the people remotely, yes.
Yes, thank you very much for being there as well. Thank you. We'll be in touch. All right, so thank you very much. Enjoy the sun still. Go travel home safely and see you next time in good condition. Thank you. Thank you.